How you
How's
doing, brother?
I'm all right. How are you?
Good. Good to
Nice,
see you.
nice to see you too. Thank you so much for joining me.
My pleasure.
It's always a pleasure, having an opportunity to talk with you. And the
Same here.
the response to these videos has been really positive. And your talks have been very informative and insightful. And I think people who watch the channel share the same sentiments. So following in a similar fashion, I thought it would be great if we could talk a little bit more about, maybe you could share some more of your Zappa stories with us. And I mean, I'd like to start really by asking you about your musical interaction and experience with some of the other members of the Zappa bands between 19 and 82. But just quickly before you do that, for those who don't know, I just wanted to quickly contextualize. Before you joined the Zappa band, you were at Berklee, of course, but you also had played in other bands. And I'm interested to know what that transition was like from playing with those earlier bands to all of a sudden being in a band with Vinnie Colaiuta, Tommy Martin, Barrow, Ike Willis, and Ray White.
Well, it was an, a surprise and delight, and it was a bit of a stunner because, Berkeley it was fantastic for me at the time. It's an environment of young musicians that are finding their independence, that are communicating with all sorts of musicians and co-creating and learning and jamming. I mean, they're right in the door next to you. I remember when I got to Berkeley, just around my room was my dorm room was you make friends, you make lifelong friends. I mean, I met my wife there, you know, and the diversity of the instrumentations of the musician, most of them are guitar players, but I remember there was a bassoon player, trumpet players, sax, percussionist. So this was all of a suddenly a giant candy store.
Yeah.
So, but many of the people there that go to Berkeley are young people that have some kind of a pull in to music, to maybe it's the music industry, maybe it's aspects of the music collective. But when you're young, sometimes you're not completely connected with what your gifts are, so to speak. So what I mean by that is those things that feel interesting, natural, and very creative to you.
Mhm.
you know so a lot of times people say, well, I don't really know, but I love music, so I'm going to pick up the guitar or whatever and go to Berkeley. So you get there and you have a lot of people that are beginners, you know pretty much. So they're making their way and they're practicing and they're taking classes and discovering various aspects of the music business. So, what I discovered from going to Berkeley and then shooting ahead 40, 50 years, from that uh, period, was a lot of the people I met had uh, started out with one sort of interest in the music business, but playing an instrument, playing the guitar, but then they get in and they recognize, wow, this is a vast industry filled with all sorts of services, producers, engineers, artistic people, attorneys, managers, agents. There's so much. And a lot of times they recognize something within the music business that resonates with them a little deeper.
Mhm.
So I met great friends at Berkeley that went on to do things that I've connected with them through work in the music business through these years, but they're in a different field. They're not playing, so to speak. They may go home and play, but like one friend of mine, ended up being one of the leading agents at Garfein and Schwartz, which represents film composers.
Right.
So there's all these kinds of things. So when you get to Berkeley, it's not like a pool of extraordinary talent. It's a lot of people trying to find their way.
Sure, I understand.
There's a small percentage of real excellence where you can see, oh, this person has something going on seriously as a player. But you also recognize a lot of other things as the years go on, because a lot of those players that I remember befriending and being mentored by and hanging out with and jamming with, that just floored me. I mean, they had everything over me as a player: chops, intelligence, um, tone, all these things. And I would just be like, well, okay, they've found their place. They're going to flourish into. But what I discovered was there's other things involved with navigating the music industry as a professional independent guitar player. You know,
Mm.
there's a particular I'm going to use the term belief in yourself, but I'm not a big fan of that,
Mhm.
because like a belief, when you believe in yourself, you're projecting something into the future that you don't really know.
Yeah, it's not a certainty.
It's not a certainty. Now, I always believed in myself in that. I knew, and I believe this is true for anybody, that the ability to harness creative ideas and express them, that was there. And that's really what you need, you
Mm.
know.
Yeah.
But the way I did it, and I didn't really recognize this until later, I did it very innocently and naively, meaning I didn't know or care if I if what I could or wanted to do was going to be acceptable, or if I was sorry, if it was going to be acceptable in the world or successful. I didn't know any of that stuff. I just really knew I like this and that's what I'm going to do.
Mhm.
I like this. I'm going to do that. I don't know where it's going to go. I have no idea,
Yeah.
but I like this. And that's really your key to success, is identifying with those things that feel natural to you with no excuses.
Mm.
So there wasn't very many people that I went to school with that flourished in a musical performance career when I was at Berklee. There are some, but it's I don't mean to sound pretentious about this, but through the years I look back and I kind of understood why. I had friends that could smoke me on guitar, and they had the worst attitudes. That everything sucked, and the music business sucks. And then it was there was such a I could tell. I didn't know then, but I see now that the mental tools are as important as the physical. They're more important. They come before the physical,
Mhm.
you know. So that is a something that anybody that hovers around the Zappa camp has to have. And Frank, in his remarkable ability to recognize these innate talents in people. So he could go through the whole Berklee roster, and he may not find anybody that would be appropriate for his band. And it's not that that doesn't mean they're inappropriate to be professional musicians, not at all. But Frank, it was just a different ilk.
Mhm.
And I remember, because I won't mention any names, but when I'd first moved out to California and I was going up to the house and working with Frank, uh, he was auditioning drummers. Okay, this was okay. I'm trying to remember. because I went through drum auditions twice. It was well, no. The first time Vinny was in the band, it was when before Chad got in the band.
Mhm.
Frank didn't have a drummer, and when Frank would need a musician, he'd have these huge open cattle calls of people coming in, and it was amazing to watch because he just instinctually knew if they could play for 30 seconds, 5 seconds, and he's going to say thanks, no thanks, whatever, you know. And he couldn't find a drummer. And I'd watch so many drummers come and just, you know. And I remember a guy that I went to Berklee with who was one of the big guys,
Yeah.
you know, in my mind at the time, because he was in one of the cool bands and it was very fusiony and complex stuff. And he was just revered
Mm.
as a you know just the guy. So there I am with Frank. I'm 20 years old, and I just got out of 20. Now it was Chad, so I was probably 21. Um, and I said, Frank, I got the guy, and he was in Boston, and we were in California. Frank said, great. So Frank flew this guy out, and he was going to audition the next day, but because Frank stays up all night and works all night, you know, different kind of a clock. He had him come right down into the to the house, up to the studio, and within 10 seconds, it was obvious that the guy just he there was like no way, you know. So that was a an interesting experience for me. I felt so bad. I said, Frank, yeah, I'm so sorry. you know, I'll pay for it. You know, I'll pay for the flight. I'll pay for the hotel, please. And he said, well, did you do it on purpose? And I said, no, of course not. I really thought he was going to do it. He goes, then don't worry about it. So to answer your question, um, it was quite an awakening to be with Frank on many levels, you know, and one of them was to see how he chose his musicians and the tools that they needed to have,
Yeah.
which kept me scratching my head like, what am I doing here? You know?
What were there any specific things that you learned from playing with those musicians over the years that you were in the band? Any unique things that informed your own development as a musician?
Well, absolutely. Whenever you're in the orbit of accomplished musicians, you're going to absorb. But these guys were more than accomplished. They were intuitive, they were innovative, and their timing was you had to have all these skills, you know, be able to be in a position where Frank can compose freely.
Mhm.
See, Frank needed people where he could just say, "Okay, play this, now do this, and do this," and you know, and he a lot of the times he would just be laughing, and but it was amazing to watch him build these tracks. So he needed people that could respond instantly
Sure.
without messing around, you know, and so these guys could do that. And for some reason, I didn't realize it till I could do it too.
Mm.
You know, you just watch Frank and you just do what he said, and that's what he needed. So these guys had that. They had you know, impeccable timing, just great ears. Um, as far as writing, that didn't come up. You know, Frank was always composing and or arranging and doing everything. Uh, but the one thing that I noticed with all the Zappa musicians that came into the environment while I was there was there was some kind of extraordinary skill that they had. Something. Sometimes it was a little quirky thing. Um, but Frank, as I've mentioned before, and I've mentioned so many times, is he had this intuitive ability to recognize within a musician that quirky potential,
Mm.
and then he'd draw it out of you. He would give you opportunities to express it, and and then he'd push you to take it to even another level.
Sure.
So I can go through every musician and point out those things that I thought were those special tools that Frank needed to be in the band.
Mhm.
I think my special tool, so to speak. I was fascinated with high information music, and I liked to play quirky, obtuse melody lines on the guitar, especially Frank's, you know.
Yeah.
And at the time, it wasn't very common. You didn't hear people playing that kind of stuff, like uh, the Roxy record, or these Alien Orifice or Montana, stuff like that. Most guitar players had different kinds of chops, and I would assume that there's many that I know that could do it, but the interest level and the discipline was never there.
Mm.
And the belief, the knowing, I won't want to say belief, like I was saying before, when you believe in yourself, what you're actually saying is, but I don't really know,
Yeah.
because a belief implies that it's a belief. So what what I knew at the time was I didn't believe anything about the future. I knew what was happening now.
Mhm.
And that's all you can ever do,
Yeah.
really.
Yeah.
So I knew in myself now. And that's what it's I guess another term is you put your head down, put your nose to the grindstone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It seems that I mean, you obviously had no limitations in your mind. Obviously, you were motivated. You were interested in these obtuse things that you talk about, these angular melodies, this disjunctive way of playing. I mean, it's good not to have those limitations because then you're exploring something that is uncharted territory, essentially.
Well, yeah, I mean, limitations, I have tremendous limitations, but I knew them at the time. It's like I would see great jazz players, like at Berklee and whatnot. And I said, I can't do that. I'm not going to blow over those changes like that. You know what I mean? I could, but it's going to sound like I'm trying to, you know what I mean? And it wasn't an interest of mine to blow over jazz changes. So that was something I didn't have. There was certain timing things, locking with grooves. I could play the most obscure time signatures and polyrhythms and stuff like that, but actually just locking with a groove, I paid very little attention to that. And that was something I had to, and that was something I got from Frank also, was learning how to groove.
Yeah.
I did not have that. I was so white, you know. And I don't mean
No, no, no. I understand.
discrepancies towards white people. No, it's just, it was very,
Figure of speech.
and it was very my strengths at the time, my interests, where I didn't feel like I had limitations, was in the very obscure stuff, odd meters, odd times, difficult fingerings.
Yeah.
But when it came to like sight reading or jazz or classical or playing, no, I was very diminished.
It's interesting you talk about this because I mean, take transcribing for an example. I mean, I don't know if you will agree with this, but it seems to me that transcribing is a bit of a lost practice. A musician starting out or a musician who wants to move to the next level come up to you and say, "Oh, how do I get better? How do I improve?" When you say just transcribe, and they seem to be dissatisfied, and it's not a satisfactory answer. They want you to almost wave a magic wand and give them a secret code or something. And it's like, no, it's just transcribing. But I was
Yeah.
reading an interview you gave in the Guitar Player magazine in 1983. It's quite an extensive interview, and I'm not sure if you were still with Zappa at the time. I know you finished touring because this came out in 1983, the beginning of '83. And you were talking about transcribing and mentioned that there was a musician friend, I assumed it was at Berklee, who would transcribe the Larry Carlton solo. And this inspired you to start transcribing. And the first two solos you transcribed were In the Dead of Night by Alan Holdsworth and Europa by Carlos Santana. And how did those solos inform your playing at that point in time?
Well, they would inspire me, not so much because I transcribed them. That's not where the energy is,
Hmm.
but just listening to them. I mean, I was a kid when I heard Europa, and it just spoke to me. It was very clear. I was in a music store, Corvettes, and it was the record department. And I used to love going up there because I just look at records, and they were playing it in the store. And that was it. I mean, I had heard it. I said, that's the voice of God, from my 13-year-old years or 12-year-old, whatever it was. Um, so transcribing it was more just like it didn't really have an effect on me as far as the way the melody is so touching, you
Mm.
know. But it
Yeah,
was a great. See, I've always you see people. You say it's a lost art. I do know people that transcribe, but it's the kind of thing where you just have to be drawn to it. You can tell people, well, uh, transcribing is a great thing to do because it develops your ears and your imagination, not in that order, are the most important thing. You have to, well, it behooves a performer to be to be bold with their imagination, to allow themselves to um, imagine beyond, a little bit beyond their limitations. And every time you do that, your limitations
yeah,
expand. So you can tell somebody you have to, the ears are the most important thing because you have melody in your mind, in your imagination that's yours, that comes from, it's built around everything about you,
yeah,
but you're not going to be able to get it out unless you can hear it and know how to play it.
yeah.
So the way you do that is you train your ears to just make the connection
Hmm.
between your fingers and that imagination. And transcribing can help because there's so many things other than people like I don't know notes. I don't want to. They see notes on a staff as like a person in jail.
Yeah, yeah.
The bars. They're like totally lost, totally intimidated by little black dots,
Yeah.
and I get it, I totally get it. But then there's those that see those black dots and go, I want to know what that is. And that was me. I was just like, I want that. I want that more than anything. I love the way that looks. I want to write that. I want to control it. I know that that means music. And I know that if I know how to wield it, they all have to do what I say. you know
Yeah, you're
and,
the
it,
boss.
and it's what this says, and I that was it. I knew that when I was a kid, so I started studying composing. So you see, there was an attraction. You don't need that. You can't force anything like that.
Mm.
It was obvious. Music was obvious and natural to me because I don't know. It was just it came with the package,
Yeah, yeah.
from the universe. And everybody has that, but not necessarily for that. I mean, how is it that I could write that Zappa book and just do all of that transcription if I wasn't interested or if it was a chore? It wasn't a chore. It was like, get out of the
Of
way. Don't
course,
anybody
of
talk to
course.
me. Leave
Yeah.
me alone. I want to go to heaven. You know, oh,
Yeah.
you have to have that.
Yeah, I totally
And then you
understand.
look at it and it looks like art. I'm
Yeah.
looking at the music in back of you right now, and it's giving me wood.
Well, that book is absolutely beautiful. I mean, the transcriptions are gorgeous, and I get what you're saying about the transcriptions there. Of course, there's a distinction between the actual science of it and the feeling, the emotive content. I definitely understand what you're saying there. I mean, the the Frank Zappa Guitar Book. Now that's one of the most inspiring things I've ever seen. I just it's just remarkable. And as you said, you have to be committed and you have to be interested and motivated because that stuff, as you've mentioned, I mean, it's just takes so long. I read somewhere that you spent hours just working on one bar. There's a bar in the theme from the third movement of Sinister Footwear where you've got a tuplet, four crotchets in the time of seven that intercept the second beat. It's in 3/4, right? And on the second beat, this four in the time of seven starts, and within that four in the time of seven, you've got these nested tuplets, and it comes out somewhere on the second beat of a bar later on. I mean,
Yeah.
that rhythm is absolutely crazy. And I was looking on your website as well. I mean, I've seen it before, the temperamental page, which is really interesting. And you talk about it was intuitive because I'm just when I first saw it many years ago when I first saw it, I said, how does he write that? What is he thinking?
Well, it was a creative process, and it was very enjoyable.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's very important. So what I would do is I'd listen, and for some reason, I had an attraction to music and math. I'm not a brilliant mathematician, but I did very good in school in math because there was something about it that made sense to me, and there was a creative element to it. Uh, Totally failed English, social studies, every other class. I was, you know, far, well, if I wasn't average, I was below average. But music and math, so that kind of transcribing, especially that book,
Mm.
um, especially pieces like that, but also probably the most dense is he used to cut the grass.
Yeah.
I mean, I can tell you about certain ways that I approach some of the transcribing in that. So
Mhm.
anyway, so I would listen to something and I knew that this was one and that was one,
Yeah.
and you got a bar or something and you just listen and things like 16th notes, triplets, whatever, they're obvious.
Mm.
You can knock those out. But I would get to the point where like if something was 16th notes, da 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 da, but it went da 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 da. I wouldn't just write 16th notes.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? There's a creative way to interpret that
Mm.
with the understanding that you can do anything with time as long as you don't go over the amount of beats and that you know how to mathematize it, so to
Yeah.
speak.
Mm.
So I would hear things, and there's arcs, especially Frank made it that way because the way he played was very visceral. His sense of time, if you could have something like 3, 4, 2, and you could see Frank when he's soloing going, he put time right on top of it that has nothing to do, and then he'll start playing that. So that's why you get all that nested
Yeah. Yeah.
tuplet stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
But you can hear it, so you you do need to employ your imagination and some visualization. Do you know
Mm.
what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because some of that stuff is so dense numerically
Mm.
that you're like the one you pointed out. How could you how well it's a listen if you listen to the line and you put it in perspective of where the beats are, you hear even within that strict time certain retardandos, accelerandos, and you I that sounds like this. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then I'm like, yeah, that could very well. Is it exactly that? If you type this stuff into a computer and then played it back with the track, would it be exact?
Yeah.
A lot of parts, yes.
Yes.
But I
Yeah.
would I would assume some of it is, yeah, I mean, damn, I was barely, 20,
No,
when
it
I'm
was
doing
it's
all that
an
stuff.
amazing feat. And I mean, even as Zappa said in an interview that, you got quite volatile if anybody questioned what you had written. And he
Yeah.
said, I've got evidence, a lot of this stuff is proofread. And he would, like the piece that I was talking about, theme from the third movement of Sinister Footway, that's got tuned percussion on it. So they obviously read your transcription and played it, and it came out right. So a lot of those transcriptions are obviously accurate.
Well, the thing is, at that time, we didn't have computers. So, I mean, I was using a cassette deck, and I've gone through quite a few of them, transcribing that stuff. So what would happen, the process was I'd listen, I write it down. My calligraphy was a little atrocious, because I mean, I have reams and reams and stacks of my transcriptions. It looks messy. Uh, a lot of times I would love to go back and redo it nice, but it's just too time consuming. So then I take my scraps. I mean, they're scraps, but it's all there.
So,
And I would give it to one of Frank's copyists, and he had like four full-time copyists constantly copying his music. So they had to then take it and they would put it, they would with their calligraphy put it on onion skin with
mhm.
these special rapidograph pens, which by the way, Frank gave me all of his rapidograph pens once. Did I tell you about
You
that?
did tell me, yeah, that's
Okay.
fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah. And like an idiot, I used them until they were all, shredded. So after the copyist would get it, and he'd make a score or sheet music for, I mean, the music for it. That's it.
Hmm.
But there's a lot of errors. There's always errors. Even when you're composing music, sometimes you don't know until you get to rehearsal, you know? So there was no way. It's not like that music is in a computer and I can hear the notes.
Yeah,
So usually the rhythms were, a lot closer or a lot more accurate than the notes. So the notes were, I wouldn't say they were inaccurate, but there's a not, you just make mistakes.
sure.
You forget a sharp or flat or something, and then you would be shocked at how many errors happen when it's being transcribed into calligraphy,
Sure.
when it's being copied.
Copied, yeah. Yeah.
Tremendous errors. And I remember I was with Frank and Deathless Horsey.
Yeah.
And there was a wrong note in the music. And Frank's like, it just in the don, 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 don. And I'm like, and I go and I look on my
Yeah.
score and it's correct.
Right.
So you just don't have a lot of control over that stuff.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
So there are mistakes that are human and human, It's,
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's fantastic. I mean, you also talked briefly last time about the jazz discharge party hats and
yeah.
dentures stitching, and I mean, that's really an extension, isn't it, of the the stuff that we're talking about. These absurd kind of rhythms. I don't know if this. I mean, if you think of it this way, but when you were with Frank Zappa and you were transcribing, you were asked to transcribe the narration for Gregory Peccary. Did you do that before the Jazz Discharge Party hats or afterwards?
I don't remember. I think the Jazz Discharge Party hats came first.
Okay.
I think,
Oh,
I'm not very good with the past. Chronological,
that's all
you
right.
know.
Yeah.
So, but the process was the Jazz Discharge Party hats. Uh, when we were on tour, the first year I was on tour, he had recorded it from the stage.
Mhm.
So that we were back in the studio and I was listening to it. And at that point, I had kind of made the discovery way back then that every sound is a vibration and there's a pitch to everything. So I would go around and start knocking on stuff, and everything's got a pitch. I'd listen to the wind, and if it, and I would, and these days it's wonderful. I engage in these very deep listening meditations where you just sit, you become hyper present, and
Mm.
you give all your attention to what you're hearing without losing it and without any thought.
Sure.
You know, you just listen. It's remarkable what's going on around us, and you don't label anything. You don't complain about it. If there's a plane or something like that, that's just part of it.
Yeah.
And there's this incredible symphony. I call it the symphony of life that's going on around us at all times. And what's so interesting, I would do this and I can shift my attention. So like you'll sit there and you're hearing, you just listen deeply, deeply without letting up,
Mm.
and you start hearing things and you don't label them.
Mhm.
They're just there. They're
Yeah.
they're as they are. And you hear the wind, you start hearing like birds, especially in nature. If
Mm.
somebody's talking and you're totally aware, and what you realize it is there's so much going on, and then there's the empty space, and then you realize that this is like an endless symphony that started. It took the existence of
Four and a
the
half billion
entire
years.
past to
Don't
bring
forget.
you this hot moment that will never repeat itself
Yeah.
and is brought to you just like that in
Yeah.
this unique form. And then I would make this shift into hearing all the pitches. So they're pitches and they're music. It's music. You're surrounded by music in a sense.
Yeah.
And when you do that, it's remarkable. So I've got transcriptions of this, and it's just kind of remarkable because it's there and
Yeah.
it's hidden.
Yeah.
It's not hidden actually. It's just
Need
it's
to
it's
tap into it.
glossed over. Yeah.
Yeah.
So um with something like the Jazz Discharge Party hats and the Gregory Peccary thing, that was another. I could tell you a little bit about what happened with that, and there was the same kind of concept. There's pitches in everything.
Mm.
If you take this entire interview,
Yeah.
there's,
It's
and
pictures. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
yeah, and what's interesting is I'm starting to see people do a lot, utilize this a lot more. I
Mm.
mean, I saw this one clip. It was about polyrhythms that somebody made, and it's like they took it out like the guitar book. It's
Right.
like really out there,
Yeah.
really out there polyrhythms. And it was magnificent to hear and to see that there are people still interested in, and of course, they're going to take it to another level,
Yeah.
because there are people,
Yeah.
there only might be a few of them that have that book and recognize, because that book, I'm sorry, I have to say it was innovative.
Yeah.
There is nothing like it. And it's incredibly complex. And where I started to go with uh, it, I had to, at time, forge new kinds of notational concepts for time.
Mm.
So, for instance, because there's stuff that, bar lines were, you know, arbitrary. Like they weren't necessary in a sense. Like something like he used to cut the grass. I believe I haven't looked at it. At some point, the bar lines go away.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
just this kind of thing. And then I started to have to. Um, okay, so as I was mentioning, it's kind of like it's a meditation to transcribe, and you're listening, and you're allowing your instincts to script it out, to start showing you this sounds like, oh, okay, but oh, okay. It's really wonderful, because it's like little intuitive discoveries. Like, okay, well, nope, and then finally, like, oh yeah, yeah, and um, there comes times where there was no notational technique to express where I had gone. So, for instance, um, I would start hearing things like you would take the first few note values of a quintuplet, but then the note value of a triplet starts, of a real triplet
Hmm.
inside of that. So, so then at times you have a certain amount of time left in a bar, and there's situations on top of it that don't necessarily follow uh, notational um, convention,
Yeah.
not just even polyrhythms.
Hmm.
There's like it's hard to explain. I didn't really. I was hearing it when I was doing that stuff. I made a mental note of the concept because it was unique. I'd never seen anything
Yeah.
in the notational world in regard to subdividing time with uh, notational tools.
Hmm.
It required different ratios
Hmm.
that included time and notation. It's really kind of hard to explain, but it was a more of a conceptual insight that I haven't really explored yet.
I mean, I think that book is really innovative for many of the reasons that you've already explicated, because there was no yardstick by which to measure. You know, if you're doing conventional music notation, you can look back, there's a whole school, and you can consult those publications, you can consult those schools, and you can make some sense of what you're doing. But it's a book to be proud of. There's no doubt about that, because, as you say, there's so many innovations in there in terms of rhythms and nested couplets. But and it's the speech influence thing as well. That a lot of as Frank Zappa said, a lot of his solos were speech influenced, and trying to cohere to that in notation form. I mean, it's a
Well, it was a lot of that stuff was bold that I did, and also it was insightful. Like I say, I don't know how accurate it would be if it was actually put into a computer and played against the original. Uh, but there's enough in that book uh, to inspire somebody to start looking in unconventional notational ways
mm,
to take it from here. But
yeah.
there's very few because after that book was written, I remember thinking nobody's going to get this. A, B, if they did, big deal. What? What are you going to write a hit song with it or something? And C, uh, it's very obtuse,
Mm,
uh, but I don't know where things are heading. And I do know that there's people that are going to use any things at their disposal to advance themselves and technology. And for those in the uh, musical notation, rhythmic notation field, that book
mm.
will be very inspiring.
Yeah, yeah, I think so. I mean, I love that phrase that you gave to the Dangerous Kitchen and Jazz Discharge Party Hats. Was it George Benson from Venus? Did you, did you come up with that, or was that? Yeah, that's a good one. That's a good one. Um,
It does. It sounds like that.
yeah, yeah,
And
just
that was, my favorite part about doing the Jazz Discharge Party Hats was the look on Frank's face as I was playing it
I
and
can,
recording it.
yeah,
He
wonderful.
got Frank would get such a kick out of stuff like that. That really things like that, and I wasn't the only one doing it. I mean that, yeah, but other guys were doing other things, and when they just did things that surprised him, it was hard and it was rare. But when we did, uh, It was special. And I remember that was a special moment when I was playing that back. He couldn't believe it, really.
Brilliant.
I shouldn't say that
No,
he
but
couldn't.
yeah, no,
No,
it's a
he would
fair,
have to tell you that. But from the expression,
yeah,
it, it,
you've
it
done
was a
something
shock.
right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, I just wanted to ask you about the Zappa tours as well that you were on between 80 and 82. I mean, 82 was an arduous tour. Am I correct? I read somewhere that you were touring for 3 months, doing 5 to 6 nights every week, nonstop. Is that right?
Well, the pace of every Frank tour was relatively the same,
Right.
and it was rare, sort of rare to do two shows and then have a day off. Usually it was three or four,
Uh-huh.
but it was never more than four. But
Okay.
they were usually double shows. They did two shows a night.
Right. Right. Okay. Yeah. Of course. Of course, that makes a difference.
Yeah. And
I
that
mean,
was that whole aspect at that time for me was the real challenge.
yeah.
It was rough
Yeah.
because of my inexperience, because of the pace, because of the intensity. I mean, Frank doesn't tour like anybody, not even remotely that I've come across. I don't know if I've in the past have given you a chronological day on tour with Frank. Did I?
I can't remember. You've talked about it, but maybe not as chronological.
Well, of course, there were days that you had off, but usually you were flying that day. But most of the days you were doing shows. And Frank had about 80 songs in our repertoire. And in 1980, that set list for me, it it had some difficult stuff, but not so much.
Yeah.
81 and 82, the stuff was death defying. It was
Yeah.
60% of it was like, you know, it was death defying on guitar.
Yeah.
And there's 80 tracks and I have to practice that stuff constantly to keep it on the fingers.
Yeah.
And Frank would write the set list 5 minutes before we went on stage every night. And it was different every single night. So I didn't know, if he's going to call Maggio, Alien Orifice, Approximate, these the pieces of music that were just very difficult. So I had to constantly practice them. So you wake up at 9 a.m. basically, and you're on your way to the airport. And this was back when, there was borders in Europe on every country. So every time you went into a different country, you had to exchange money, you had to go through customs and all this stuff. And you got to get your luggage out, and then you go to the airport, you hang out and wait, you get on a plane, you fly to the next destination. And with Frank, never once did we go from the hotel to the airport. I'm sorry, from the airport to the hotel. We always went from the airport to sound check. And then Frank would, if we had 2 hours before doors, every minute up till doors.
Wow.
If we had three, sometimes 4 hours before doors,
Yeah.
Frank was recording, writing, rearranging, and you had to be just sharp on. And right up until, okay, Frank, we have to open the doors every time. And then he'd go off, and you get 45 minutes before you got to go out and play. You go out, do a set, you write the set list right before you go. And then you get another 45 minutes after that show for them to change out the room. And then you do another show, another set list. And then you finally, by the time you get back to the hotel after everything, it's 2 a.m. and I have to practice, because I have to go over the black page and go over Alien Orifice and go over, all this stuff because if I leave it for a couple of days, you can't do that,
I understand.
you know? So I remember the first 2 weeks on the tour, it was really difficult. I got very sick. I didn't sleep. I didn't eat well. I turned yellow. I got jaundice.
On this. Yeah.
Yeah, because I just wasn't, I was dehydrated and I didn't have my sea legs. And I remember I thought Frank was going to fire me because I mean, I was a mess. I played and I played all the right notes. That was that's what mattered. I always delivered. I don't know how. Staying up all night. So I remember once I mean I hadn't slept. I was like my brain was like wet bread. And I walk into the airport and Frank is sitting there and I was a mess. I mean, I was really, and I didn't know what Frank was going to do. And he sat down and he looks at me and he goes, "You look like a guy who's been on tour for the first time."
Yeah.
And that was enough for me to realize, you know what, you're okay. You just got to get your sea legs together here. No more messing around. This is a different mindset. You're not home in your mom's living room, your teenage bedroom. This is serious. And Frank was like, that man, he just walking through airports, you couldn't keep up with him.
Yeah.
Frank was like, boom, 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 don't bump,
Okay.
boom, bump, right? Dunk, 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 dunk. Ha 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 ha. Okay, boom, boom, boom. No, don't, 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 don't. Yes. Okay, king, king. You know, and, and you're like relentless.
Relentless.
Fantastic. What a training. 20 years old.
Yeah, what a training, definitely.
3 years. But I really enjoyed it. I mean, after the first year and I got I started to get the traveling together
Yeah.
because after that first tour, I swore I'm never touring again. That career is that idea is done, you
Yeah.
know. But because Frank traveled, he first of all he flew every day,
Mm.
and flying on show days, man, it's not a big fan of that. When you have a bus, you get to sleep.
Mm.
But you had mentioned the '82 European tour, and quite frankly, for me, that was the one that was my easiest. It was the hardest music and the most music and a grueling tour, but psychologically, I was maturing.
Right.
I got my sea legs, and it was the first time in Europe for me, and it was a beautiful summer, and so I have really fond memories of that tour.
That's great. That's wonderful. I mean, thanks for your time, Steve, for talking with me today. I mean, it's just great to hear all these stories, and I know people, as you said before, they really genuinely are interested in this, and uh,
Frank, you know, Frank fans, they're like anybody else that um, finds an artist that really speaks to them.
yeah,
Frank, especially Frank, because and the reason is because he was so connected when he was doing it. He was so authentic, so honest. It was like this governor in his mind that whenever he would, it wouldn't the ideas of being superficial or placating. They were so removed from his musical vocabulary and his musical expression that only his pure creative vision flowed into it. And that's what we love in any artist, somebody that's really, it could be anybody, as long as they're authentic with their own interests, because that's when you get to go really deep. And look at Frank. I mean, that catalog. I mean, I'm 64. He died at 52. And every day but I know how he did it.
yeah.
He just did it.
Mm.
Just did it. And as a result, he made this catalog of music that if it resonates with you and you discover it, it's just a life treat. It's like there's nothing like it. It's like a warm place. It's like home. And this is for anybody that for some people Metallica is that, for guys like us, it's Frank,
Yes, yeah.
and we're lucky. And I'm happy. I don't do Zappa interviews anymore, except with you, because I'd be talking about Frank all day. But I want to, I want to do my best to honor my memories with him because he was such an iconic creator. And I know how fascinating it is for others who, like us, love Frank and love to hear these little tidbits. So I'm happy to do this anytime. Well, within reason. You're doing great stuff, brother. I'm really happy to be a part of it. I'm so happy you're doing it. I hope you're doing the other guys too.
Yeah, yeah. I'm going to get around to that. I've already spoken to Mike Keneally, so
He'll give you good. Frank loved Mike.
yeah.
He'll give you a lot of good stuff.
Thank you, Steve. I really
All right,
appreciate
brother.
it, and I hope to see you soon. All the best.
You got it. We'll hook back up.
Yeah.
All right. See you next time.
Bye.